Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. Welcome, Big Ten fans, and welcome, Big 12 fans. It's a crossover of the conference variety. Thanks, everybody, for coming along for the ride tonight. Here on Big Ten Ted Live, we've got a great show set up here for you tonight on a Tuesday night. We're going to be talking to Bomb3r, Big 12 Mafia, Holy Rivals show, Big 10 and Big 12. Kind of some macro issues in college sports, things like college football playoff and expansion and things like that. That's all the rage. Eventually, we're going to move on to what's going on in the football field, kind of like the conversation tonight, is eventually we're going to talk about what's going on in the field. We're going to talk Big 10 versus Big 12 non-conference crossover matchups. That's Penn State and West Virginia to kick things off on Big 10 Saturday night, as well as Illinois and Kansas on a Friday night. So we're going to be talking about those crossovers as well. Very excited about what this conversation is going to, what's going to happen with this conversation with Bomb3r here tonight as well. Great way to get involved tonight is via chat. Get your chat on screen guaranteed with a super chat as well. Here are some things coming down the pike on the channel. We've got a live prediction show. I'm going to put it all out on the line. Going to make my predictions of every single Big Ten football game this season. I want you along for the ride on that one. Going to be August 23rd or 24th. Not sure on that Wednesday or Thursday yet, but we'll make sure we let you know specifically when that is going to happen, when specifically that show will take place. Because I'm sure I'm not going to pick every game the way you think it's going to be, so I want to hear that feedback. Working on getting a star-studded Big Ten cast of guests for that show as well. Here are some other things that are coming up this Friday. You're going to see a conversation drop between me and Roman Thomas-Shaw from Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation as well. He covers the Washington Huskies for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation. Going to be talking all about Washington coming into the Big Ten Conference. You know, at Washington, they call it in Seattle the greatest setting in college football. You know, one fan base and one stadium that might want to at least have a discussion about that is BYU. It's pretty beautiful out there at LaVell Edwards Stadium in Provo, Utah. With that, we welcome in Bomb3r from Big 12 Mafia, Holy Rivals show, everything. Here we go. Welcome to Big Ten Country.
Hey, thanks so much, Ted. I really appreciate the offer to be here, and I'm looking forward to this show. You're a lot more sophisticated than my show is, so I'm going to take a lot of pointers from you.
All right. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to our discussion here tonight because we've got the Big Ten, obviously, perspective here on this channel. You got the Big 12 perspective over there. Before we really get into this conversation here tonight, I just want to say this, is that obviously I was born and raised in Wisconsin, living in Minnesota now, but the Big 12 is just so intriguing to me. It's going to be so fun. Let's talk about that first, is when we get to, of course, you got Oklahoma and Texas this year, but when you get the Four Corners schools in 2024, how excited are you as a BYU fan to be able to renew a holy war, maybe at least at the end of the season with Utah, and just the amount of teams that could maybe win the league when we come to 2024?
It's going to be the best league top to bottom, the most equal between teams. The matchups every week, you could have a different winner. And whoever comes out of the league at the end, whoever's in that final championship game, I could see both those teams easily making a 12-team playoff. And you know, they could possibly be 3 or 4 teams deep when it comes playoff time. We would just have to see how the year really worked out. But 24 is going to be incredible. BYU and Utah, arguably top 5 rivalry in the entire country. You got the Territorial Cup coming in with Arizona State. And then you have obviously KU and Kansas State and Baylor and TCU. I mean, you go all the way to the East Coast, and now you got UCF coming in there really wanting to throw down with Cincinnati. And then West Virginia is just waiting, lurking, waiting for people to come into that really cool stadium, and they play well at home. So I think the entire league is going to be fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to learn a lot about the Big 12 here. These Big Ten fans here are going to learn a lot about the Big 12 here tonight. We're going to be talking about some more macro issues. Let's kind of dive into what's been talked about here, at least the last couple of weeks, and it's been realignment. It's crazy. Obviously, I had our buddy Greg Pfluger on the show a couple of weeks. Maybe that was only a week ago. And he says, well, we'd love to be talking football right now. No question about it. But there's one man that's responsible, and it's our good old buddy Georgie K, is why we're sitting here right now. Guy couldn't get a deal done. So let's talk about the Big Ten and the Big 12, because it's split down the middle in terms of those 8 Pac-12 schools that eventually left the conference. You know, it seemed like a little bit a while ago that when the Pac-12 was kind of struggling throughout all of this, that this was going to be the outcome. You'd see Oregon and Washington join the SoCal schools in the Big Ten. You'd see Four Corners going to the Big 12. It made too much sense. But yet, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's not exactly going to turn out that way. Did you have a good idea that this is what, one, you wanted to see in the Big 12 and what you thought would happen?
The moment last year when they went through, the Pac-12 went through their solo negotiating window with ESPN and Fox, and they didn't come out with a contract. And 3 weeks later, we found out that those negotiations with the ESPN had sort of fallen off. Yep. Then the next week, Brett Yormark comes out and says, we're in negotiations to take over that contract from Fox and ESPN that they offered to the Pac-12. From that moment on, I always thought that the Four Corners would come to the Big 12. The only question was how many would the Big 10 additionally take on? I'm a University of Washington fan. I'm from Washington State. So I was hoping that Washington would have a wonderful landing spot in the Big 10, but you weren't sure, right? Until the very end, if that was going to happen. But I kind of felt once they turned down that first contract deal and the Big 12 picked it up, I thought the game was over.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, Washington and Oregon just kind of made too much sense for the Big Ten, and I'm kind of glad they went. There's been a lot of back and forth on this channel, specifically what value the Ducks and the Huskies really bring, and I think there's no question about it. I talked to some Oregon people, had an Oregon segment on the live show last week, and they definitely bring a national brand in terms of people. When, you know, there's these teams across the country in college football, you just know. And everybody knows Oregon, flashy uniforms, Nike. Right. It's just one of those brands that really sticks out. And I think it's great for the Big Ten Conference. Then you kind of look at the Big 12. You were talking about those rivalries, and you even kind of going back a little bit to the WAC days before Arizona and Arizona State joined the Pac. They were in the WAC, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. With Utah and BYU.
Yeah, and Colorado was in the Big 8 at the time. So BYU, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State until 1978 when they moved to the Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time. So yeah, I mean these are deep-seated rivalries. They go back decades, and I hope Brett Yormark is going to be able to capture what rivalry weekends will be like in November next year. I just imagine all the rivalries going back to back to back in weeks. Maybe you feature 2 on the first week and 2 on the second week and 2 on the third week, and it'll just continue to drum up pressure until hopefully the finisher is BYU Utah, because that one's going to draw well into the 5-6 million people.
Oh, it's as good as it gets right there. One of the best rivalries for folks here, maybe in Big Ten country that don't know. That is one of the best rivalries out there, and it's great, especially the historical aspect, how it all started, the history between the two schools. When I visited Utah a couple of years back, really got to know a little bit about that rivalry. So that was very interesting. So of course we got the Pac-12, now the Pac-4. Really right now, and they're kind of on life support. Stanford is trying, they're begging to get into the Big Ten right now. I don't think it's going to happen, but this consolidation is everything that we're talking about right now. And Absolutely. We'll kind of get into the discussion of how this consolidation translates to the college football playoff. What's kind of your thoughts on this consolidation? Good, bad, or it's just the way it is?
I think it's just the way it is. It was going to happen eventually. There's only so many players that are in the media space for sports right now, and there's only so many windows that you can broadcast games. That was the problem for the Pac-12, is they could put all kinds of games on Apple Network, but nobody would watch them.
Right.
They wouldn't be on linear streaming. They would sub out some games, but it wouldn't be near what they would need for all their schools to get a lot of press. Really, you want to have coverage, and without that, you can't have a conference. So it was a matter of time that the Pac-12 disappeared. It's eventually going to be, in my opinion, 3 conferences between 20 and 24 schools in each conference, and that's going to be it. You're going to end up with 3 that are going to be fairly well balanced out. The money's still going to be a bit of a disparity. I think the Big 12 is still going to be behind the SEC and the Big 10, but the teams are competitive and the schools are dedicated to playing football and sports in general in the Big 12. They're not going away. And if once the ACC blows up, some of those schools will go to every conference that's available, and now you're down to 3 conferences.
Boy, there's a lot to touch on with what you just said, but I kind of want to go in this direction. Earlier this week, I did a video on it of Trev Albert's comments about, he says, in the future, there's going to be 35 to 40 brands. They're going to do just football. You're shaking your head already, and I think we're on the same boat, even though I really like Trev Alberts and what he's done at Nebraska as an athletic director right now. So basically in that comment, he's trying to say, well, Big Ten and SEC schools are going to kind of break away and do their own thing. I kind of came back and I said kind of what you're saying. I don't think you can leave the Big 12 out of this discussion. Are they making as much revenue as the Big 10 and the SEC? No. Do they have the football brands that those 2 conferences have? Probably not. So you and I are kind of in the same boat where you're going to see the Big 10, you're going to see the SEC, and you're going to see the Big 12 break away. Do you think it's going to kind of be after this ACC deal, these conferences are going to get together and kind of make this happen? Or how do you see this split kind of happening in the future? Because he's talking about tearing down a system that's already been built up, right? Is like, well, maybe these Olympic sports need to be more regional and maybe football needs to be out on its own. What's kind of your take in the direction we're going with maybe the 3 conferences going?
I think it's ironic that Trev Alberts, who's leading a school that hasn't won a conference championship in over 20 years, is this. And I love Nebraska, right? Tom Osborne. I grew up watching Nebraska and Florida State and all these great games, but they haven't won anything for over 20 years. So for them to come in and for him specifically to say, oh yeah, we're only 35 to 40 schools are going to be in some super league. Look, I don't know if you were following it, but they tried a super league in Europe, and how did that work out? They're as passionate about their football over there as college sports is in the United States. It's a perfect analog. The 2 are almost identical into the way they work, and a super league blew up because the passionate fans rose up and basically said, "Nah, you're not cutting us out." So if you go 35 or 40 teams, just do the math. That's a third of the schools, a little less than a third of the schools today competing for what is 131 in FBS. So you're going to take out 2/3 and basically disenfranchise them. I don't think so. Besides all the local legislatures, besides all the tax challenges that you're going to have, you break off football and birth its own little minor league to the NFL, they lose all their tax-free incentives. Now they no longer are operating a tax-free operation, and it'll crush itself just because there's not enough revenue to support it. So I think it's nonsense. It's an elitist ego type of a thing, and I just think it's ironic that we're hearing it from Trev Alberts. I mean, if Nick Saban came out and said that, maybe there'd be a weight behind that. But Trev Alberts, he's a goofball. I mean, win 5 games in a season and then come and talk to us about how your team should be in some super league.
And we're talking about promotion and relegation has kind of been thrown out a little bit as well. And it's kind of, I've heard many people when talking about promotion and relegation bring up the point that says, well, it's so different in college sports and specifically college football. If Fox lines up at the table and says, oh yeah, I want Michigan, I want Ohio State and Penn State, and God forbid something happens, and 1 year or 2 years they win 6 games and 7 games, and all of a sudden Purdue and Wisconsin win 10 and 11. Well, wait a minute, I paid for Michigan and their fan base. Wait a minute, I paid for Ohio State. It's just the more you kind of go down, it's fun to think about, it's fun to talk about, but with the current day and age of how television works, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of
Well,
sense.
answer me this, Ted. How is Rutgers or Indiana or Illinois or Purdue or Vanderbilt or I mean the Wake Forest? I mean, you just go down the list. How are these schools going to allow themselves to be disenfranchised and taken out of competing for the ultimate prize? Look, I'm not saying that there's more than 8 teams that can win the championship every year. That's not the point. What we're talking about here is access, and you want to give the most access to the highest brands. And I think you could easily make an argument that there's 64 to 72 brands that are worth putting together and having a valid championship.
Yeah, like right now, if you you put you kind of split up the ACC, and eventually let's kind of transition to that right now, and then we'll maybe come back to this point, because the ACC just seems to be, they've got a target on their back right now,
right?
And who knows when it's going to happen, whether we're going to wait all the way until 2036, or is it going to happen sooner with this whole grant of rights situation. Let's start with you in the Big 12. And then I'll go in the Big 10. Who would you like to see eventually join the Big 12 from those East Coast schools in the ACC?
Realistically, Louisville. I think you have Pitt. I think you have possibly Georgia Tech. People have talked about Syracuse. There's 4 or 5 teams that everybody kind of wants to have in, but the Pitt rivalry with West Virginia would be another rivalry, right? We could build the Big 12 up to be the rivalry conference. I could totally see that being part of the advertising, right? If you have all these strong I know West Virginia's been looking for travel partners forever. North Carolina State has been listed. It just depends what schools go where. If Virginia Tech would be a major win. If you could get Pitt and Virginia Tech and maybe Georgia Tech, oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
So I'd love to see the backyard brawl back be a conference game at the end of the year on Thanksgiving weekend. I think Louisville and Cincinnati had a rivalry back in the Big East. You mentioned Syracuse kind of going. I'd love to see a group of a Big East, something like you said, like what do we got now? A Cincinnati and a West Virginia. Let's throw Pitt in there. Let's throw Louisville in there. Let's throw Syracuse. You got 4 or 5 schools kind of rekindling kind of the old Big East. Of course, from a Big Ten standpoint, I'm swinging big, baby. I'm bringing out the lumber, and I'm looking at Florida State. Right. I'm looking at Miami. Okay, let's bring a rivalry, because I think that's one thing that gets lost in this is some rivalries do get the axe, right? We're going to see Oklahoma State, things like that. Texas A&M got the axe for a little bit. Obviously, it's going to come back when the Horns join the SEC in 2024. But having Florida State and Miami both join the Big Ten, I think is very important. Clemson, Notre Dame. Like, that's my 4. I know that is a pipe dream when you've got 3 letters down south, S, E, and C. I understand that getting all 4, well, I've included Notre Dame as the 4th, but getting those 3, Miami, I don't think the SEC wants Miami right now. I think Miami is a future Big Ten member. No doubt about it. And I think it's a great ad. Hopefully Miami over time can get better with Mario Cristobal on the football field. Florida State is kind of that one that's teetering right now. Clemson is teetering. It all depends what the SEC kind of wants to do. Backup options, North Carolina, I think is a solid backup option. Virginia, I've heard people throw out Virginia. Of course, the Big Ten loves their great academic schools. And it's in a great area. But we already got a school in DMV with Maryland out there. I'm not as crazy about Virginia as maybe some other people are. And Notre Dame is not going to join until the very last millisecond.
Until they're forced to. Somebody's going to have to force them to do it. They're not going to leave that. They basically vote themselves as an entire conference votes. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's outsized. And I want to know, look, relatively the Big 12 is small potatoes compared to the Big 10 and the SEC. I don't understand why you guys don't get together and strip away what is basically a shell of a Notre Dame institution when it comes to competition, right? The last championship they won was in '88. Lou Holtz was the coach, and I watched that. I was in high school, all right? So that is a long time ago. I don't understand why these bigger conferences don't go to them and strip away that one power vote, so they basically have to pick a conference. I don't understand why they still hold the power they do. If you haven't won a championship in over 35 years, how are you a player today?
So we got John here chiming in. I don't want Notre Dame. And they're arrogant fans in the Big Ten. They don't understand. We don't need them. And that's the case. I said this in the winter sometime. I can't remember when I said it. It's just like the Big Ten is in a position of power over Notre Dame. Like, let's look who's Notre Dame. Notre Dame's playing Tennessee State this year. Though they played Marshall, and they lost to Marshall last season. I thought one of the directional Michigan schools was on their schedule this year. Like, I remember when I was growing up, and Notre Dame was playing the best of the best, right? They played Michigan every year. They played Michigan State every year.
They played Miami. They played Florida State.
Right.
They played, Clemson. They were all over the place. They used to travel all over the country.
And I didn't mind that. I didn't mind them. Like, okay, if you're going to stay independent, you play the best of the best. And every year, Notre Dame had that best schedule. You know, they had USC, of course, on the schedule every year. When you had USC and Michigan and some of these really good teams, okay, fine. You can play all the mixture of Power 5 teams. That's cool with me if you're independent. But now it's a totally different story because of this ACC deal where they have to play 5 ACC opponents every year, Wake Forest and some of these other weaker ACC teams. It just doesn't pack the punch. And now you have this TV deal in 2025 where Notre Dame is asking for around $75 million on par with like what Big Ten. The Big Ten is a conference package. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, Oregon, things like that. And you have one, like if Notre Dame's playing the best of the best, still $75 million is a big stretch, even if they are playing great teams. For one team for 6 or 7 games, right? But then you kind of throw in who they are playing right now. It's just, I have a hard time believing NBC is going to go for that.
Well, think about it. Who are they playing now? They have the 6 games or 5 games they have to play every year in the ACC. So you just sort of write those off. They're out of conference games, out of conferences, quotes, because they're all directional schools. Stanford is now floating, so they're no longer going to be an elite win if they have them every year. USC's moved to the Big Ten, so now that's not an out of conference game anymore. It's like they're in a conference. So who are they going to play? Central Michigan and Marshall, and but the independent schools are drying up. So I honestly don't know how they can keep their strength of schedule up high enough to keep that braggadocio going. I just, at what point do people get tired of Notre Dame and just say, hey, look, the world's changed. It's not 100 years ago. Knute Rockne's long dead. And you haven't won anything in forever.
Let's talk. I think it's got Notre Dame's schedule pulled up here. You're going to start off with Navy. They're gonna play Tennessee State at home. Okay, we're gonna talk about a lot of home games here because, of course, that's what NBC ends up broadcasting here. Navy, Tennessee State is at home. Central Michigan, there's that directional school, is home. Only on Peacock, by the way. All right, let's just throw it out. Now they get Ohio State, right? Of course,
right, that's good.
At home, so I'll give you that one. But then you kind of look at Southern Cal is at home. Outside of Big Ten teams, you're playing Wake Forest, you're playing Pitt, you're playing Tennessee State, and you're playing Central Michigan.
You're not playing Florida State. You're not playing Clemson. You're not even playing Miami. You're not playing Virginia Tech. I mean, these are teams that could compete. Notre Dame's not stupid. They're going to keep doing what they're going to do until somebody strips it from them.
Because I think the big thing with Notre Dame is that we have whoever has allowed this to happen. And I think the Big Ten is in a very interesting situation here because you have the ability. I don't think they will go to 10 conference games, but they have the ability to do that. And I think the further you kind of keep on going down the line to 10 conference games, it just shrinks the independent schedule for a team like Notre Dame and all of that. Well, I'm glad we got that Notre Dame talk out of the way.
Yeah, burn that right out. That's absolutely good. That's fine.
I'll never turn down that when it comes to Notre Dame. We've got the Big 12 Mafia crew here today. Not only on screen, but in the chat, we've got our guy Immaculate.
Immaculate's one of my key contributors. I want to shout him out, and Moen Sports as well. Thanks for being here, guys.
We've got Moen in there as well, saying the last time Notre Dame won a natty, Mama's Family was a ratings winner. Mama's Family was a ratings winner.
There's a lot of things that were different when last time they won a natty, believe me.
We got John chiming in here. Super excited to have USC playing in the Big Ten. They're going to take a pounding, but they'll be in every game. Very excited as well, John, to see how the Trojans kind of face off in that as well.
I think all 4 of those schools are going to compete. Maybe not the first year, but you're going to see they're going to scale up with the money, and the recruiting will pick back up again. And I think they might be surprised. Those trips to either Eugene or up to Seattle, even down to LA, they can be pretty tough.
Boy, I was talking about before, and of course, as a Washington guy, kind of talking about now outside of, you got those big Ohio State and Michigan. And I kind of tweeted this in terms of the tiers of the Big Ten going forward, but I'm just going to list off some teams: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Oregon, Oregon, Washington. Both of those teams are top 15 teams this season. I didn't mention Iowa. I didn't mention Wisconsin. Who knows if Nebraska starts winning?
Yeah, maybe Nebraska. Trev Alberts is speaking his truth.
I mean, if Nebraska is able to get back, that's an if right now, but if they're able to kind of get back into that stratosphere, I mean, that just adds a little bit more depth. Illinois is the team with Brett Bielema. I mean, you got to keep on taking deep breaths here because
Wisconsin, you didn't miss, and Wisconsin and Penn State. Yeah. I mean, it just keeps going and going, right?
That's the thing.
I think it's a great conference.
Some teams, I know we might talk about Stanford and Cal a little bit later on, but I think some teams might be like, yeah, we would welcome Stanford and Cal. Give us a little bit of a break on the schedule.
I think there is something to that. I think that there is something to, you need auto wins. I hate to say that, but every conference needs teams that they can help pad their schedule. You can't play the Steelers 15 weeks a year. You would absolutely get beat up in the NFL because the Steelers are a physical team. That's what the Big Ten is. You look at the Big Ten, you're like, oh my gosh, where's your week off? There's only 5 or 6 teams out of almost 20. There's only 5 or 6 I can think of.
It's going to be tough. I've talked about this on this channel before with Oregon and Washington. Now they will be going through quarterback transitions in 2024. Bo Nix and Michael Penix will kind of no longer be in this conference, and they'll have new quarterbacks when they start up in 2024 as well. But when I kind of look at the future with this, is what happens to a Purdue? What happens to even an Illinois that went 8-4? Both those teams went 8-4 in the regular season this past season. What happens to those teams? Are they forever destined to 6-6? But here's the
Greg
thing.
Pflugar's rolling over in his grave, and he's not even in it yet.
Oh boy, I haven't even mentioned Minnesota. That's my bad.
I tell you what, you trade access for money. So they're saying we want to be in the club. We're willing to go 6-6, 7-5 on a good year, but we're getting $100 million. And schools will do that because they're on Fox. They're on NBC. They're on CBS. Eventually, they'll be on Amazon, maybe back on ESPN. Who knows? And it's all about keeping, the whole front porch thing, letting the world know your school exists. Yeah. And the SEC and the Big Ten they have guaranteed spots and all those sales things. The Big 12 needs to show everybody they deserve theirs.
We got more from Moen. Illinois. I love Illinois, and this is a great comment here from Moen with Brett Bielema. I've said this before. I said it with Greg last week, and maybe you guys have a guy like this in the Big 12. But Brett Bielema was put on this earth to do one thing and one thing only, and coach Big Ten football. Like what he was able to do at Wisconsin. I know Barry Alvarez set it up pretty nicely for him as well. But then coming back into Illinois, look what Illinois was. Back, they were not good when you take a look at guys like Lovie Smith and Tim Beckman kind of over the years. This was the rug that people wiped their feet on to get into the Big Ten, to kind of get up the standings just a little bit, and what Brett has done. And of course, because then you look at what happened at Arkansas, it's just
I was going to say Arkansas was a disaster. So you were like, how did that happen? How much of that was because Alvarez left him a loaded team and legacy recruits that lasted 4 or 5 years, so he had a really good run? I don't know. I've heard a lot of people talk good about him. I've only seen his upside and downside, and to me, I'm not saying he's not a good coach, but I'm not sure he's a great coach.
He's kind of in an interesting spot, because when you look at Wisconsin, it was the longevity of kind of how he was able to maintain that success. And that's a big question for guys. Ryan Day is kind of taking the brunt of that right now at Ohio State is Urban Meyer set it up nicely for you. And then, now, here's the thing. Okay, I'm going to quickly go off this, and I'll come back to Brett Bielema. Ryan Day, people say he's on the hot seat, and I just want to I don't know. I can't. When you win 11 games and people say you're on the hot seat, one, that just tells you what kind of program you're in. It just
right.
I just can't handle that right now. But that's how big this rivalry is with Michigan. Is you lose it a couple of years in a row, and all of a sudden people are claiming you're the next John Cooper, of course, that didn't have a great record against Michigan, and look what happened over to him. But let's get back to Brett Bielema a little bit. And some may say, I grew up in Wisconsin. I was in Wisconsin when Brett Bielema and Barry Alvarez were kind of going through their runs a little bit. Some may say Brett Bielema kind of raised the profile. I know Barry is a legendary coach. He's the Don of Wisconsin, no question about that. But what Brett was able to do, 3 straight Rose Bowl appearances. But you know who else made a couple of appearances without winning anything? The Buffalo Bills. They were the Buffalo Bills.
They
of
won
the Rose
4,
Bowl.
actually.
Yeah, 4. Was it 4? Okay, that was right there. So it was a TCU, Oregon, and Stanford, maybe I want to say, in those Rose Bowls as well. But I think Bert is a good coach. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Bert can get it done. Can he get it done at Wisconsin? I think where he was able to really take advantage with Wisconsin. Remember, Ohio State was going through the tattoo thing, so they were a little bit. That was after Tressel. Remember, Luke Fickell coached Ohio State to a 6-7 season. Right. Believe it or not, Penn State was going through what they were going through. You had a lot of teams kind of going through some transitions. Of course, you had, I think that was Rich Rod-ish era, Brady Hoke kind of era at Michigan. So you had some teams that were down. Somebody's got to step up. Wisconsin and Brett Bielema were able to do that. But he's proven at Illinois that he was put on the earth to do one thing, and he's doing it
I think it's interesting. The teams that get good coaches, they stand out, and you can always tell the winning programs that have the good coaches because they play better with same talent than other schools that have same talent that don't have a good coach. A good example of that is Kyle Whittingham at Utah. Right, arguably top 5 in the country football coaches. He's one of the best recruiters. Yep. I have a ton of respect for him. Obviously, he's from BYU. He's an LDS guy. Represents the state and the school really well. And I really respect what they've done up there at Utah because, again, just like BYU, don't have all the advantages here. You don't have a coast. You don't have an ocean you can have as your backdrop. You don't. We have mountains here, and that's about it. So to win in these programs, you have to have good coaches.
So maybe I'm just stuck in a Big Ten bubble, but I didn't know Kyle Whittingham was an LDS guy. I didn't know he went to BYU. That makes this thing even better.
He graduated in '82, I think. Okay. And he almost got the job at BYU when Croton got fired. You don't want to know this. Anyways, they didn't want to pay him. And so Utah paid him, and then he's been there 20 years and really successful.
I got to get to some comments here from our buddy Immaculate. What's your opinion? Is the Ohio State-Illinois rivalry a real thing? A real thing? They do play it for a trophy. They do trade for the Illini. Is it the Illabuck or is it the Illini Buck? Anyway, rivalry thing or just an excuse for Ohio State to win over the years. It was a bigger game for a longer period of time. Of course, Ohio State has had more sustained success, of course, over Illinois over the years, especially over recent years. I know Illinois, I believe they had a 2001 sticks out to me under Ron Turner that they had a decent team. Illinois has, of course, been very up and down. And Ohio State, when we had the 16-team schedule and the scheduling format came out, Illinois and Ohio State was going to be one of those protected games. Now that we add 2 more teams, who knows what the scheduling format is going to be. But it's kind of one of those games. I don't know what you guys have in the Big 12, but it's one of those games in the Big 10. Sure, it's a trophy game, but just how much weight does it? Like Penn State, Minnesota is a trophy game. Is it a rivalry? Is it a big-time rivalry per se? Not so much. You look at Michigan State, Indiana for the old brass platoon, not something that really sticks out where it's, man, these teams really hate each other kind of thing. There's a lot of history behind it, no question about it, but hopefully with Illinois being better, that rivalry kind of comes up just a little bit.
The more money they get, the entire conference, the better they're going to be. They could go 12 teams deep one year.
Yep.
Anything's possible. I think we eventually end up with 16 teams in a playoff. It gives more teams access, and it also brings in more money from all the media partners. Everybody plays, and the best team's going to come out. You're still going to end up with a Georgia, an Alabama, or
Hold that thought on the playoff, because that's what we're going to get to next, but I want to get to some comments.
Sorry. Didn't mean to jump ahead.
First. No, you're good. You're good. We're going with the flow of the show here. Moen bringing back nightmares from my childhood in Wisconsin when I lived there. Ohio State and Wisconsin, that Russell Wilson year, 2011, Hail Mary losses to both Ohio State and Michigan State. 2 Hail Marys away from an undefeated season over there, and of course they lost to Oregon in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, that was they should not have lost that game. They should have won that game. I was frustrated because anytime I can cheer against Oregon, I will. So, all right, you guys are all gonna love to hate Oregon. They're the easiest team in the world to hate, and they're just the only reason they are where they are is because of Phil Knight. I'm not sure. I think I made you myself, but in the 90s and then the 80s, Oregon was a doormat.
Yes,
they were one of the worst programs in the Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time. They were horrible until Nike started putting money into the program, and now look what you can do with money. But they haven't earned it. Anybody who says this nonsense about Oregon's a blue blood, don't make me laugh. I want to.
I wouldn't go that far.
Throw up my dinner when I hear crap like that. Oregon's gonna have a tough time in the Big Ten. They're not going to like being there, I don't think. They're going to
I'm very curious. I had an Oregon discussion with someone last week from an Oregon podcast, and there's a lot of – I think Oregon's going to be – it's very tough to see where an Oregon's going to be, where a Washington's going to be, where a UCLA – I think we all think, USC is going to win double digits kind of every year. But where do these other teams kind of fit? I think UCLA is a big-time wild card right now. They just recruited a great 5-star quarterback from the Detroit area, and Dante Moore, if he can develop, maybe, and Chip Kelly, who knows, maybe they can catch lightning in a bottle right now. But
when's the next team going to win with baby blue uniforms? That's all I want to know. Nobody can take a team seriously as wearing baby blue. UCLA's a joke. They're 70s and 80s. Troy Aikman was the last quarterback that won anything at UCLA.
I can't imagine Chip Kelly coming into the Big Ten Conference and having a ton of success. That's the way I see it. Maybe they'll get somebody else in there. Who knows what's going to happen. I think the Chip Kelly shine has kind of wore off because, of course, he had great shine at Oregon, of course, getting to a national championship game in 2010 against Auburn. And then he goes to the NFL. And then he comes back and, being in Los Angeles, his recruiting is not very good. Okay, right now in the Big Ten, I don't think it's even in the top 10 in the conference in recruiting, or it's somewhere definitely past the middle of the conference. I'd have to go back and look that up right now. But he's relying on the portal big time. And if we know anything in the Big Ten about people to do that, I'm looking at you, Mel Tucker. I'm looking at you, Michigan State, where you go and you get a great transfer portal guy in Kenneth Walker, and you jump up to 11 wins, and then you jump down to 5-7. The portal can kind of make you go like a roller coaster.
Right.
Sometime you still need to be able to recruit your guys in here. So very excited to see what Oregon can do but there's going to be a lot of depth in this.
Travel is going to be a thing too. The Pac-12 schools, they signed on for additional travel, and maybe in the first part of the season, it's not so bad, but you do long road trips in November. Those are going to catch up to you, especially if you want to tool up for a playoff run. You flying 3,000 miles to go play at Rutgers. That's not a game you want to do very often.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll see. And there's a difference in playing. I said this before, and I'll say it again. There's a difference. USC fans have talked about, and they have. You look at their record against Big Ten teams, and yes, they've had a great record against Big Ten teams in the past.
Historically,
no question about it.
Yeah.
But where did a lot of those wins come? They came
in the Rose Bowl.
One game in their backyard.
That's right.
Okay? Yeah. You go through a 9-game schedule, right? You go through Iowa's defense. You go through Wisconsin. You go through Illinois, where you are taking a beating every single week. And this kind of goes on the same side of the basketball, because Big Ten's a very physical basketball conference as well, and their 20-game conference slate as well. But you are taking a beating every single week. It's going to be different. And saying that, I think these Pac-12 schools who have great offenses, no question about that, they're going to need to physical up. And then you take a look at these Big Ten teams, they're going to maybe have to know that there's going to be some offensive firepower that's going to be coming in. I think
they're going to have to get quicker.
Both sides are going to have to really mesh and really adapt to the other. So we'll kind of see how that goes. Let's talk college football playoff, because this is a very interesting discussion right now that I want to talk about. Because with the essential dissolution of the Pac-12, and we'll see what happens here in the next couple of weeks, it was a 6+6 format. Of course, you had your 5 Power 5 champions, and then you'd have essentially one group of 5 champion automatic berths in the college football playoff, plus 6 at-large bids. Now, it's reported about a week or so back that says, well, we're going to kind of sit back and talk about this again right now. Where do you see this going? People are saying 5+7, where you have your Power 4 plus a group of 5 champion. Some people saying, let's just take the top 12, regardless of conference championship, regardless of anything. Where do you stand on this issue in the college football playoff?
In 26, when they redo everything, think it goes to 16 teams. I think we're still going to have the champions, the 4 champions. It's going to be an A4, unless something happens with the ACC before then. I did think the ACC would blow up by 26, but now seeing how toothless FSU was after their threat to move, they may just sit back and just stay in the ACC. If that happens, you have 4 champions, then you have 8 at large. Oresco came out today and said if they pick up Stanford and Cal, Oregon State and Washington State, now all of a sudden they're a power conference again, and it's just not going to work out that way. They'll probably refashion and come up with some sort of championship between maybe a Mountain West and an AAC, and whoever wins that gets into the tournament. So if you're talking about reserve slots, I would say it's 5 and 7. Going to 14, it would be 5 and 9, I guess. That's where I think we end up.
Okay, there's a couple of different ways to approach this. Access. You talked about access before. And I think a big reason why people love the NCAA basketball tournament is Siena and Northwestern State aren't national championship threats. George Mason, even though they made a couple of deep runs in the tournament, they're not a national championship threat. But they want people to have access to be able to, at the beginning of the year, where everybody can say, if I win my conference tournament, I got a shot. I got a shot at it. And I think it's the same way where you have these power conference champions. If they win their conference championship game, they get into the playoff. You have a group of 5 team where I say, well, if I win 10, 11 games and I win my conference championship game, everything's right in front of me, unlike the BCS, unlike the 4-team college football playoff. But I will say this, there is a big disparity between, well, I think you go Big Ten and SEC, then I think you drop down a little bit to the Big 12 and the ACC, and then you go all the way down the stairs to the group of 5.
Right.
When they get into the playoff, because you look what happened, just what you guys just did in the Big 12. When you look at these group of 5 representatives in the New Year's 6, I think Houston made it a couple of times. Of course, Cincinnati, didn't they make a Peach Bowl and a college football playoff, if I remember correctly?
That's right.
A couple of appearances, UCF as well. A majority of the teams, especially maybe in recent memory, you might have to go back a little bit to find some more, a majority of those teams that made those New Year's 6, the group of 5 representative that made those New Year's 6 games are off to the Big 12 in a power conference. Like, I'd be very curious to see what you think of this. Like, who are some of those teams that are going to be those group of 5 representative going forward? Who do you think are the top brands in the D5? And then my follow-up to that would be, can they compete with a Penn State in a first-round game? Can they compete with a Utah? Kind of go off on that.
Well, your top brands, if you're just doing brands, Boise State's number 1. It should lead every list. Unfortunately, they're the one that everybody's looking past. I want them to be competing every year. So if you give a slot to a group of 5 champion, as it were, I could easily see Boise State challenging for that every year. Tulane is another good program that they just need a break. And then you talk about psycho sort of dreaming an SMU that says all these promises about they have all this NIL money that's going to prop up the program, right? That's what we heard for the last year. SMU's a true challenger, and yet They can't even win their own conference. So there's only 2 or 3 teams, I think, that every year could come out of the group of 5 that would challenge. But Boise State is the top of my list every time.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that the group of 5 with conference realignment, as we continue to kind of go down, the group of 5 will continue to get weaker and weaker and have much less resources. I think is another thing is the financial disparity. It's already huge. It's going to keep on getting bigger and bigger. I think it's going to keep on getting bigger and bigger between the the Big Ten. Here's something that we need to know about the Big Ten versus the ACC. And this is kind of one thing I just want to interject with just a little bit. The ACC deal comes up in 2036. There's a potential that the Big Ten could renegotiate not 1, but 2 TV deals before that ACC deal is up. And that's crazy. And that's going to create even more of a disparity between even level 1 and level 2, Big Ten, SEC, and the ACC, and all those other leagues as well. So here's one thing. If we do go 12 or 16 across the board, it's just these conference championship games don't really mean much. They really
I agree
lose
with you.
their luster. Like, you're going to have a big matchup to maybe determine some seeding.
It's
or
money.
Something like that. Yeah,
Ted,
money,
it's all about
course.
money. It's just another way for the conferences to get more money for advertisers. The Dr. Pepper Big 12 championship in Dallas, Texas. It's all about money. It's certainly not to protect the athletes.
No.
The athletes now are playing 4 more games in a 16-team playoff. That's 4 more games outside of what your championship game is. Now your champion, if they go undefeated, how many games have they won? They've won 12, 13, and 4 more, 17 games. That's insane. I think you get rid of the conference championship games. Whoever has the best record at the end of the season would get the bye, and then everybody else would play for the at-larges. I would like to see that, but I don't think the championship games are going anywhere.
Well, that's the thing. You just would have to put that revenue into more playoff revenue. It's just like, okay, we have this money that we're making in the Big 10, the Big 12, whatever conference championship game. That's great. Let's just get that money maybe in the playoff somehow.
Right. Yeah, that could happen. That could happen. It's possible. I think it's a money grab by these conferences. It's really hard for me to see them walking away from it.
This whole thing is a money grab. And that's like...
That's true.
That's I don't like saying that a lot because I still like to believe, and I'm an optimistic guy, and I want to believe that they're doing this for some other little reason, but it all comes down to the almighty dollar when it comes down to it as well. So I think there's a couple of scenarios. I love what's going on with 12 teams. I just want to say that. I thought that there were multiple tiers to get to, right? To win a conference championship, okay, you get a bye, right? You can play in the first round, but those are home games. So, of course, you're going to fight harder to get a higher seed to get a home games. I like the multiple tiers. I will say this about 16. I believe 16 teams takes the tiers away a little bit, because, of course, everybody's on an even playing field. And you mentioned before about things as well is just how many games we've added on over the years, right? Remember when Florida State won the last BCS title all the way back in 2013? That was 10 years ago. They won it by playing 14 games. And now we've added, 3, maybe 4. I think we could go as far up as 17.
Yes.
I believe there's been a lot added. We talk about increase in games. We talk about increase in travel. That's just the thing I really worry about. And a lot of administrators and maybe people, the suits, as I like to say, will say, well, they're getting NIL money, so it's okay now. So that's something I hate hearing that, really, because NIL is something that should have happened a long time ago.
Right, I agree.
So I just hate hearing that because still got to go to school. Still got to, do other things that you want to do. It's just I can't imagine being a college athlete right now. I can't imagine being and we've heard some Pac-12, some Oregon softball players really speak up in opposition to this. I can't imagine that. That leads me on to my next point, a bullet point that we kind of talked about before. We've got this Big 10 and Big 12 crossover happening right now. I got a little bit of an idea. Not saying it's refined a little bit. Maybe it needs a little bit more refining, but we tried to have the alliance before, and it failed miserably. Yes. All right, it fails miserably. This is what happens when you don't sign a document. By the way.
Hey. Back of a napkin, man. Back of a napkin.
when
Everything's
we're talking
okay.
about when we're talking about these Olympic sports going
Uh-huh.
forward, do you believe the Big Ten and the Big 12? Because I think they could really benefit from each other. Because we talked about at the beginning of the show where they both took 4 Pac-12 schools either way. So
Right.
the geography is there. Do you think that maybe in some of these other sports, and maybe football a little bit as well, but maybe we could maybe cut down in the number of conference games and thus the amount of travel, and maybe have some of these, like Oregon plays Colorado and Arizona still plays USC. Do you think that's something that maybe we could work out in the future?
I think they're going to have to do something like
Yeah.
that. Whether it's an alliance, a contract, or something. There's scheduling agreements that they can bring out. Now, there's already the Big 12 and the SEC have gone along together for a long, long time.
Right.
They've done scheduling, but I really like the dynamics of the middle of the country matching up with the Big Ten. I've always thought that was smart. And now what you got is a Western wing with BYU, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. You could easily have crossover games that continue those old Pac rivalries where you play a Washington and Oregon, USC, and UCLA. So I definitely, if they're smart, they'll do that because they need to do anything they can to keep travel down.
Yeah, I think that's a bit, especially for the Olympic sports. Football, a lot of people have said it. You fly out there, you play a game, you fly back. Now, you mentioned you do that a lot during the season, and that could maybe wear on you a little bit. But that's just one thing. I thought about this for basketball. Actually, before I get to the basketball thing, I want to talk about this as well, because when you take a look at a Big Ten and Big 12 crossover, these are with scheduling as well. These are kind of 2 conferences that kind of match up a little bit geography, right? Because you look at some of your Iowas, your Minnesotas, kind of in the same areas, like a Kansas State, even Oklahoma State is an ish drive. You could kind of work. You go to the east, like look at a team like a Rutgers. Or a Maryland in there. You look at West Virginia. You look at Cincinnati. If the ACC falls apart and they grab Louisville, there's some travel over there. I just think the Big 12 and the Big 10 could really benefit from each other from a travel standpoint. Maybe not so much on the football side of things, but maybe on the basketball and Olympic sports where you're playing more games during a week and you need to try to cut that down.
I think they're going to have to. They're going to have to do that. And you know what's cool is Brett Yormark's brand new, Tony Petitti's brand new, and they both have already been in conversations specifically about college football playoff, but you got to know they're talking basketball, they're talking, gymnastics, whatever else that they're competing in. They have to do anything they can to keep that travel budget down.
Really appreciate Bomber Brown here. We got a lot more to talk about here on the show. We've been talking a lot about this off the field stuff, but you know what? It's time to talk about football. What are we, less than 2 weeks away from this all going down right now? It's time to talk about it. And we've got some Big 10, Big 12 crossovers that I'm really excited about. One that really sticks out to me kind of early on, and we'll kind of go back and forth on some of these games. Illinois at Kansas. We talked about Brett Bielema before. They got a tricky early season schedule. Toledo's a good MAC team. They got to go on the road to Kansas. Kansas was the darling of college football last season with that undefeated start in the first half of the season. How do you see this one going down? Kind of for our Big Ten audience, kind of give us a little bit of a breakdown of what Kansas looks like coming into this year.
Well, so they return a bunch of players from their last year team, and they got off to a great start last year. Their coach and quarterback are fantastic. So as far as where you have to travel to Kansas, BYU has to travel to Kansas in September, and I have them losing that game. So if I was picking, and you've already spoken about Illinois quite a bit. I didn't know much about Illinois, but if I had to bet, I would just bet the home on that. And if it's a 3 to 4 point spread, I would easily say Kansas covers.
Right, exactly. I'm very excited about what's going to happen with this, because you've got a contrast in styles between the Illini and the Jayhawks. Kansas, of course, with their quarterback Jalen Daniels, is they're gonna throw it around. We saw what they want to do. You look at Illinois. Brett Bielema is his ground and pound. He is classic Big Ten through and through in this game. Now, here's one thing from an Illinois Big Ten standpoint that I don't want to say it scares me, but I'm looking at it a little bit. You've got this passing attack for Kansas,
yes,
right now,
which is really good.
It's very
Really
good. And I kind of
Yeah.
I feel like I looked up Kansas a little bit a while back, and I think they return maybe their leading rusher and receiver, if I
And
remember
and
correctly.
their leading quarterback and their
Thank you.
quarterback,
Yeah,
starting
yeah, yeah.
quarterback, and then their defense returns, I think, 8 or 9 starters.
Sure.
So I mean, they're good.
Okay,
That's
so let's dive into this a little bit. You've got no Devin Witherspoon, right? Was drafted in the top 5 of the NFL draft. No Sidney Brown back there at safety for Illinois. You got some good players. I think this Illinois secondary is going to be better than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people says, well, you lose some of these really good guys. How do you replace those guys? I think that's the key. If Kansas can this is the second game of the season.
right.
Okay, if they catch Illinois and maybe they just haven't found their feet under them, guys like Taz Nicholson and Matt Bailey back there in that secondary, if they're just not quite there yet, that's where things could maybe go. I see this game as a contrast in styles. Which style wins out? Is Illinois going to be able to ground and pound a little bit, or is Kansas going to be able to throw it around a little bit? Where does Kansas kind of factor in the Big 12 Conference this year?
I have them in the top 5.
Okay.
So I think they're going to win. They could go 7-5 or 8-4. And depending on who wins the BYU Kansas game, I think really dictates really 2 games in the league. So if they can beat BYU two weeks after they play Illinois, that would show me that their returning starters weren't able to keep the continuity that they had last year. Look, they were great at the beginning of the season, right? They got up to like ranked 12th or something like that, and then the whole season fell apart, and they ended up did they finish 6-7 or 7-6? It wasn't where they wanted to be. So this year, their coach returns. He didn't leave. He could have chased money at Wisconsin. He could have gone to several ACC schools had openings he didn't take. So I'm gambling that Kansas is going to be 8-14. Their quarterback is arguably the best in the league, and I think they're good.
Very excited. I'm very excited about that. I took off work for that Friday. Okay, that's
There you go.
That's the only Friday I cover high school football here in Minnesota.
Okay.
That's the only Friday it looks like I'm having off right now. So I'm very excited. And there's some good Friday matchups. I will say, because I just mentioned from my work standpoint, it's just like I've heard about the Friday night time slot, and overall for 98% of people, I'm like, yeah, that seems good for me. Let's just put like Rutgers and Maryland games on Fridays. So anyway, that's just kind of how I feel about that.
BYU plays a Friday game, but it's because of the church has a conference, a worldwide conference, and so one Saturday a year that's reserved. So they play a Friday night game by choice. It happens to be Cincinnati this year, and it's the first Big 12 game at home. I would not bet against BYU. I don't know what the spread's going to be, but they'll cover.
So we got
telling the world.
And here's the thing about Illinois' early season schedule. I mentioned Toledo, good MAC team.
Right.
You got to play at Kansas. Penn State's in there as well, even though that's at home, big noon kickoff. People are saying, don't sleep on FAU right now. We got the Tom Herman and Casey Thompson combination back together again. Illinois is going to win the game.
Yes.
But I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult.
Is that in Florida?
No, that should be in Illinois.
Okay, then I think that's a win.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a win. It's just it might surprise some people the way it maybe kind of ends up going.
So who do you have winning? I didn't hear you pick.
It's Illinois.
Illinois beats Kansas?
Oh, Kansas. I thought you were talking about FAU for some reason. Oh, boy. In that one, I think it's Illinois.
Wow,
I think it's physicality. Oh, boy. I don't think it's close, though. I think Illinois' secondary is a lot better than people give it credit for.
They just lost their leader to the Seahawks, right?
They did.
He just got drafted in the top 10. But I'm a Seahawks fan, so I'm tracking that. But so they replaced him.
Yes, they did. They got solid. It's not Devin Witherspoon. Okay. It's not Sidney Brown. Those are great NFL players, of course. But there are still some decent guys back there in the secondary that got time last season. So I think it just ends up being style. And I think Brett Bielema, I think he's going to get it done. I just don't know about Kansas on the back end of that secondary. Illinois, I believe, has got an upgrade at quarterback with Luke Altmaier. I think they got a solid receiving core. It all depends on the running game, though. Let's go on to our next matchup. Penn State, West Virginia. All right, so West Virginia is one of those teams in the Big 12 right now where a lot of people have them kind of ranked towards the bottom. I knew more about Kansas than West Virginia. Tell me what I need to know about the Mountaineers coming into this season.
Well, it's Neil Brown, right? If he makes it through the first 4 games and he's 2-2 or 3-1, he might keep his job, but they're going to struggle, I think. They have not done well the last several years, right. And I think this is the year that it finally blows up. They should have fired Neil Brown last year, and so I think this year, just from a top-down perspective, I really think they're going to struggle.
It's very difficult because that's kind of what I've heard about West Virginia. Penn State is loaded.
Yeah,
folks.
I had Penn State number 2 in my preseason breakdown, so.
They are, I think, a lot of people. I see some Michigan folks. I see Hummus Hero, Ohio State guy in our chat tonight. Penn State, man. I am doing my prediction show next week, and I just don't know. Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State are all college football playoff caliber teams. I think they're all national championship caliber teams. I feel bad for West Virginia, considering where they're at as a program, under the lights. Big Ten Saturday night, NBC debut. You got a quarterback with a lot of hype in Drew Aller, who I think is going to be great this season.
They're going to have 110,000 people are going to be at Beaver Stadium. I mean, it's going to be a whiteout. I just feel bad for West Virginia. I like West Virginia, right? I got a lot of West Virginia friends that we've picked up since I started doing this, and I think even they know that that's going to be pretty tough.
It's a tall task, I think. And this is a great opportunity. I think one thing that I'm looking at from a Penn State point of view, Drew Aller, young quarterback. Let's get him some confidence early on because the big key for him is going to be gaining that confidence because a couple of games down the road, you got to face, we just talked about him, you got to face Illinois on the road, which has one of the best defensive lines, not only in the Big Ten, but Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph are one of the best pairings in all of college football. That's a sneaky game right there because that is Drew Aller's first real big test is going at Illinois as well. So looks like we're both in agreement that it's going to be a little bit more difficult for West Virginia going up against Penn State. You know, those are the 2 games I sent you, and this was a glaring omission from me. But Iowa and Iowa State. I don't know.
Oh yeah, trophy. Yes, we can talk about that.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. Wow,
I can't remember. Last year they played at Iowa State, right? Isn't it?
No, that was a Kinnick. That was a Kinnick.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it should be at Iowa State this year, I believe.
Okay, so I have that backwards. I thought that they played at Iowa State last year. Anyway, Iowa State is that game is a war. I wish that game was played in November. I don't know why they played in September. But I don't know much about Iowa. Immaculate, one of my key contributors this year, he's the Iowa guy. He might be able to put some notes in there if he's still watching. But Iowa State, we broke down in our Big 12 breakdown, and I think if Iowa State's defense shows up, they could be good this year. Now, the problem with Iowa State is every year that they're picked to go big, they don't. And every year that they're picked to not go big, they go up. I've got them winning 4 games this year, which tells me they might win the Big 12 if we go by my previous picks for Iowa State. So I don't know, but you throw all the records out at the Cyhawk Trophy.
Okay, so here's the deal with this game. This is kind of one of those games that I've observed over the years that can really go in a lot of different directions here right now. When I look at Iowa has a much improved offense. I know, folks, we might have some Big 12 folks that are kind of coming over into this stream right now. Iowa's offense was the butt of every single joke, and they should have been last season.
When are they going to fire their coaching staff? That's what I want to know.
Well,
is this the year?
Here's the thing about that. I just want to touch on this for just a minute, right? Brian Ferentz has they got to score 25 points a game for him to win his job and all this stuff. Right. The way Iowa has been going, their defense has been averaging like 7 at least points per game. So what does that mean? Brian Ferentz has to put up a couple of touchdowns and a field goal kind of every single game. So maybe. I don't know if there's an asterisk on that and says, hey, you need to have offensive points, so to speak. But this is going to be an improved Iowa team. All right. And so the big thing that we haven't talked about yet is who's going to be the quarterback for Iowa State, right? Hunter Deckers is at the center of this whole gambling issue. Okay, who's putting money down on this one? That's a whole different can of worms.
You know what? Vegas might not even take bets.
Let's just take this one off.
Yeah, they might take it off the board because, look, Iowa and Iowa State are eating themselves alive with this gambling deal, which, by the way, to all your listeners, I don't know how many people watch your show, but if you think your team is insulated from this gambling deal, you're putting your head in the ground. I think it could go easily to 100 teams once they track it all down, because these players network and they're in these recruiting camps and they know each other all across the country, and they were sharing the experience with their friends. Let's bet that I can do this and make a ton of money. The fact that Hunter Deckers is at the lead of this thing is it's really unfortunate because he's a good quarterback, but he'll probably get banned.
I know, though. This is the thing. I think that has a big part in all of this. I think Iowa is the much better football team from what I understand, going up against Iowa State in this matchup right now. This defense is that's the thing about Iowa football over the last couple of years. This Phil Parker defense has played at such a high level, and the Brian Ferentz offense has played at such a low level. The way I kind of look at it is, man, this defense the last couple of years I don't want to say it's been wasted because they won the Big Ten West a couple of years back and went to the Big Ten championship game. But, man, there's so much more. Even if all we need out of Iowa this year is an average offense.
Right.
Okay? If we can get an average offense out of Iowa this year, if Cade McNamara can be decent, if Caleb Johnson runs the ball, if we get some semblance of playmakers out on the outside, that's all Iowa needs, because there were so many times last season where Iowa's defense was great, but they could only handle so much. When the offense is going out there and they're going 3 and out every single time, the defense is on the field way more than they should be. I referenced the Ohio State game. They put up 50-some points up against them, but early in that game, Iowa was doing great. But when the offense can't move the football, all the pressure goes into your defense, and eventually the dam breaks, and it all kind of comes crashing down.
So did the Big Ten get rid of divisions?
They
will now two best teams that play.
Yeah. So when they did come out with a scheduling format with 16 teams, and they will eliminate divisions. I only assume that they're going to keep on doing that with 18 teams. As well. So we won't have to deal with any more of this Big Ten West slander that people have been kind of talking about.
Well, it's been bad.
Yeah, it's been okay. So it's not great, but I will say this about the Big Ten West. It is a fun division. It is an extremely entertaining division, especially last year where everybody kind of beat up on each other.
Right.
It's fun football to watch. Is it the best football? Maybe not, but we'll kind of see what happens going forward. But the Big Ten West, Iowa, Wisconsin, teams like that, of course, will just be blended.
Well, now you have USC, UCLA, you're gonna have Oregon and Washington. So look out. The Big Ten West.
The Big Ten West is looking pretty good. I don't know what you're talking about.
It is. Next year it could be if they're still doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So though there's some Big 10, Big 12 crossover games that we're kind of looking at as well, as long as we kind of got a little bit of a break in the action, so to speak. For people that are new and maybe haven't seen you up until then, kind of tell them where they can find you and what your show's all about.
Sure. So I have 2 shows. I have the Holy Rivals, which is the BYU Utah Holy War channel. It's what it's predicated on. Now that they're going to be in the same conference next year, it's built to succeed. So over the next year, we're going to be doing BYU Utah coverage, probably pre-game, post-game, that type of thing. But Big 12 Mafia is my bread and butter show. I have several contributors, and that show is basically commenting on the news of the day. Realignment's been a big part of it. There's been a lot of commentary. I do interviews. I interviewed Bob Thompson last week, sort of the godfather of all realignment information. He's the ex-president of Fox Sports. And that's what I do, is I bring on these newsmakers, and then we have conversations and try to flush stuff out. So tomorrow you and I have a show, And we're going to be talking. It's going to be commentary. I'm not going to ask you to break down games. I'm not going to ask you to do any more than just take your experience in the Big Ten and share it with a group that doesn't know as much, right?
Sure.
Because the Big 12, while it's been around a long time, they don't know the teams that well in the Big Ten, and that's a big deal, because if we are going to be in an A3 or an A4 world, these conferences are going to be a lot more aligned with scheduling and doing other things with their different sports. And so that's what we're trying to do, is educate the people that watch the show. So I really appreciate you having me on tonight. And anybody that came over from my show, I see several of them on here, Summit Hawk and LFG and Moen Sports. Anyways, I appreciate everybody coming over after I did that bump for Ted, because this is a great show and I've been following it since last week, and I'm really excited to be here with you.
Well, yeah, it's great to have you on. It's always great to have this different perspective. I had a live show last week about Oregon, right? We kind of had,
right.
What's your perspective kind of coming into the Big Ten? Kind of got, it's education season, it seems
right.
like, here, these last couple of shows on the Big Ten TED channel here, as we can kind of continue to go on as well. Let's see what else we kind of got going on, because who do you think kind of comes out atop the Big 12 this season? Do you believe that this is going to be, is it going to be Texas? Is it going to be Oklahoma? How do you think the Big 12 really shakes out?
I think everybody's picked Texas. I think it's going to be Kansas State, and I think this could be the year. And I love Sarkisian because he went to BYU.
Yep.
And I think he's a great guy. He's got some, personal challenges that he deals with, but who doesn't, right? But I think he's the best coordinator in the country. I don't think he's the best head coach. So I think if they don't win 10 games, if they go 9-3 and lose a bowl game, like to a Tulane or something like that, I could see him getting run. They cannot be only 9-3 going into the SEC next year. So the most pressure is on Texas. Oklahoma's got the most approved because they got gutted the year before and they went all to USC, right? And so they've got the most approved is Oklahoma, and they could. I kind of have them as my sleeper team, but the team I think is going to win it outright is Kansas State. Kansas State reloaded. Chris Kleeman is a stud. Their team is awesome, and I think they're going to be right at the top. And then BYU is going to be 12-0. I'll just say that.
Obviously.
Be
I love Chris Kleiman. I worked in my first job in TV was in Fargo when he was the head coach at North Dakota State.
Okay.
Kind of just doing weekly stuff with him. He's such a good guy, and he's such a good coach. Him at Kansas State is such a good mesh, right? I believe he signed a contract extension.
He did, yeah. They re-upped him because he was getting all these interview requests,
right,
and to keep him, they needed to bump him up. So, yeah, both Kansas and Kansas State both bumped their coaches.
I want to thank Joey for the $5 super chat. Appreciate the support of the channel.
Absolutely.
Great way to support and have your comment definitely featured if we want to take the show in a little bit of a different direction here as well as we continue to kind of go on as well. One kind of thing I mentioned is and we kind of talked about this before, when you have these additions in the Big Ten, USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, we kind of touched on this before. I'm like, man, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough. When you add Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, when you added those four corners schools, I mean, Utah really stands out to me as maybe a team that's going to be really good. But the other three, at least on the football side of things, don't really scare a lot of people. What was your initial thought in terms of the competition level in the Big 12 when these schools were added?
I think it brings the higher for one thing, you're exposing an entire conference to a different part of the country. Right, you're exposing them to an entire western part of the country that hasn't been following Big 12 football. So from that standpoint, it's wonderful for the conference. As far as who's going to be built to run next year, if they were getting in this year, Utah, I would have them in Kansas State at the top. But it's not till next season, and they lose a bunch of people off this team. This team that is at Utah right now is loaded with talent, but they're all draft ready. Then most of them are going to be gone. Cam Rising, if he plays this year and doesn't get hurt, he's going to be drafted. If he doesn't make it to the end of the season, he's going to be maybe out of football because of his injuries. So, and also Kyle Whittingham, if they win the Pac-12 this year and go to the college football playoff and win a game, Kyle Whittingham's going to retire. So I think My partner on the Holy Rivals is the Wild Ute. He's a great guy.
Yep.
He has nothing but positive to think about his team next year. I think Utah's going to fall back next year. As far as how they fit into the Big 12, it's going to be different, right? They're different styles of football, and I think people coming in from the Pac-12, they kind of look down on pretty much everybody else that isn't the Big Ten. And I think they're going to run into some buzzsaws in the middle of the country when they start playing in Texas and in Oklahoma and in Iowa. It's not going to be easy. I've been watching for the last several years because I knew BYU would end up in this conference. And I think BYU's laid out pretty good. They'll probably go 7-5 this year. But in the future, if you're not recruiting and playing to this other style of football, you're going to get left behind. Arizona State and Arizona, good schools, but they better start recruiting different type players. And who knows what happens with Colorado.
And I kind of see the same thing with some Big Ten teams as well, because when you look at recruiting out west, it's a lot different. There's going to be you need to get some of that Midwest beef. You need to get some of that beef up front when you play in the Big Ten. I remember Greg said it live stream last week. You're going to need a backup defensive tackle.
Yes.
You're going to need that. I think Michigan has proven the last couple of years just what you need on the trenches and in the interior to really make up the Big Ten. Now, of course, Ohio State had a lot of great success prior to Michigan winning the last 2 Big Ten championships. No question about that. And they're of course an explosive team. Maybe they look a lot like some of these West Coast teams we mentioned before in the show, but they're going to have to, both sides are going to kind of have to kind of meet in the middle, so to speak. So those West Coast teams are going to have to beef up just a little bit going forward. I want to pivot something that's been talked about a lot is a potential breakaway from the NCAA with all of these. And we kind of touched ish on this before. I kind of want to go into it just a little bit more. In my opinion, it's Big Ten, it's SEC, and the Big 12. Some people say Big 10 and SEC. We've mentioned more about what Trev Alberts thinks, but we'll just set that aside for just a minute. How do you think this all ends up? And kind of what's your opinion on how the NCAA operates? Because I have a sizable opinion on how the NCAA operates, because do we even really need the NCAA going forward? Can these 3 conference commissioners kind of form their own organization? Kind of give your thoughts from the Big 12 perspective on that.
I think it's very easy to separate the NCAA from the rest of football. I think football by itself breaking away and doing its own thing is okay. What I don't think is going to happen is this super uber league that you're only going to have 20 to 30 to 40 teams. It's just not enough. So I think the NCAA is already out of the coverage for football as it is. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it should be basketball and everything else the NCAA does. They're shysters anyway. Nobody's honest at the NCAA. If anybody who likes the NCAA the way they run, I've never met one, and maybe you have, but I've never met anybody that talks good about the way that they run things. And in 10 years, I think you have 3 conferences. The ACC and the Pac-12 are gone, and between 60 and 72 teams. So that's between 20 and 24 team conferences. That's it.
I just don't think you can. You mentioned basketball. I just don't think we can lose the gem that is March Madness.
No, I don't either.
On all those teams. I mentioned a football breakaway, I think, is the way to do it. In the Big 10, in the Big 12, and the SEC, and you have this conglomerate of 65 to 70 teams, and they all play each other.
Yes.
Maybe not. We're not having Clemson play the Citadel in November, and we're not having these cakewalks in the SEC that they have, it seems like, later on in November. We're all playing each other kind of thing. Got a question here from Gerald McKinley, who's on our chat a lot of times. Thoughts on the Red Raiders of Texas Tech going into the season? I think that could be a sleeper team.
They are a sleeper team. I have them 3rd on my preseason top 12, top 16, right, for the league. What is it? We're 14 this year. Sorry.
14.
Getting mixed up in the – I forgot. Texas and Oklahoma haven't left yet. I have Texas Tech actually 3rd, and they are a sleeper team. They could easily end up at the championship game against Kansas State. That was my sleeper pick for the entire league. And Joey McGuire is a fantastic coach. And I've always liked Tech. I've had friends that I've met from years ago that were all Tech fans. And so I have nothing but respect for the way they do things there. I just want them to get in a rivalry with BYU. Frankly, I would love to go there more often than just once every couple of years.
What's a rival? You're a BYU fan, and I
Yeah.
might mention this with some of the incoming teams on the Big Ten side. You're a BYU fan, of course. Utah really sticks out, and maybe
Right.
some of those WAC schools that they played back in the day. But who are maybe some rivalries that we could maybe see? Because I think you got to go back to the Mountain West. I think TCU was maybe something.
Right.
Kind of educate our viewers on who maybe BYU might match up outside of Utah on the rivalry front.
Yeah, you're going to find TCU, Baylor, BYU, and I'm hoping Texas Tech. It might be Oklahoma State, though. But definitely Baylor and TCU and BYU, they align in so many ways. They're all religious affiliated institutions. They all run the same way. The way they use their money is almost identical. So I just think that those three are a triumvirate, really. And if Utah wasn't coming in, I think BYU, Baylor, and TCU could easily become, the top 3 or 4 teams in the entire league for a long time.
So we got our buddy here, John, who's on a lot. He says, this Colorado guy wants to hear something about Dion. Thoughts from the Big 12 perspective. What does everybody think about Coach Prime coming in?
I think if they win 3 games this year, they should pray for winning 3 games. Next year, I think they'll improve. They'll continue to stack on good talent. The problem is Dion's health. Right? Yeah. He continues to have these fallbacks with these infections and these surgeries that I've watched one of the YouTube videos with the coaches that they do, that they've really been putting out on social media. Maybe it's TikTok or something where it's the coach basically saying, let's get up and everybody get, energy and all these other things.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, I thought it was kind of buffoonery, to be honest. Without Dion, it doesn't carry the weight. So I think Colorado's in kind of a tough spot. They're going to do better in the Big 12 though than they ever did in the Pac-12.
So here's what we got for Colorado to start things off. At TCU.
Yeah, that's a loss.
Home against Nebraska.
That's a loss.
They got Colorado State, which should be a victory.
They should win that, yeah.
And then look at this. At Oregon,
yeah.
USC at home, Arizona State and Stanford. But then you got UCLA is going to be
that maybe has a chance.
Yeah, Oregon State is a solid team, I think.
Yeah, Oregon State's going to walk all over them. Oregon State's easily the 3rd best team in the Pac-12 right now.
And then they play Utah at the end of the season,
and that's a loss.
So
find me 3 wins there, Ted. Find me 3 wins.
It's like if you're looking for 3, Colorado State, Stanford is at home. Okay,
Stanford maybe. All right, so they didn't get one of the 2 easiest games with Stanford and Cal. If they would have had Cal, they could have won 4 games. I think Colorado's going to be a 3-win team.
The other one would be Arizona State on the road.
No, they're not. Both those games are in Arizona. They're not going to win those.
Yeah, they're not going to win those. It's going to be tough. Like, this was one of the, aside from Northwestern, and we all know about that here in the Big Ten, Northwestern and Colorado were probably the worst Power 5 teams last year.
Yeah, they struggled.
After, what was that, Mike McIntyre went to the championship game in 2016, I believe there. Ever since then, it's just been, for the longest time, Colorado has just been a doormat, really, in kind of their latter stages in the Big 12, and of course, in the Pac-12 as well. John says Nebraska is a big blast from the past game. Easy for me to say. Excited for that one. Okay.
Yeah, I know that Colorado, they're looking for that game too. They're talking about it as well. So
Nebraska needs to win that game. If Nebraska starts 0-2, I mean, at Minnesota and at Colorado, if Nebraska starts 0-2, you're going to hear a lot of the same kind of Scott Frost haters kind of come up once again, just a little bit as well. Very good discussion tonight. Really, really having fun talking some Big 10, Big 12 type of stuff here tonight as well. So you've been kind of educating me on the Big 12. Is there anything that you want to know about the Big 10, or kind of where do you see?
I do.
Go ahead.
I do. So you've got these new teams coming in, and believe me, I have all kinds of respect for the Pac-12 teams. That's where I'm from. I live here in this area, and I see them quite often. What is the perception of them coming in? Do you guys think they're soft? Do you guys think that, wow, they're up, they immediately can walk in and play against Michigan and Ohio State week in and week out? What's your perception?
I think the general thought is they better be ready to play big boy football. They better be ready to play a 9-game grind of a conference schedule.
Right.
I think for the most part, we think USC is going to be pretty good, right? We know what they're going to be. Oregon is maybe going to be in that category. But when you look at Washington and UCLA, I think a lot of Big Ten fans think they got a lot of work to do, even though Washington might be a good team this year. Okay, of course, you're going to lose Michael Penix, former Big Ten Indiana quarterback, by the way. After that, the Bruins and the Huskies, I think, got some work to do to really keep up, so to speak. I think it's just going to be very different. It's going to be very different. In the Big Ten, it's just going to be – it's going to be different for us. It's going to be different for them. When you think of West Coast football, I think here's kind of one sentiment that I think people thought of with West Coast football. Oh, West Coast football, they don't have the passion at fans at Iowa, at Nebraska, at Michigan, at Ohio State. A lot of people, when people think of West Coast football, they think of maybe the empty stadiums at Stanford and at Cal. Now, USC, of course, is good right now, so a lot of people are coming out to the Coliseum. Oregon, always seems to have. They've been good for the better part of the last 20 or so years, even though you might not want to hear that as a Washington guy.
You respect when they win games.
Exactly.
I have no problem with that.
And then you look at Washington, what they've been. You look at Washington is a very interesting. I think that's kind of one that maybe Big Ten fans aren't so sure about right now. Right. But if you kind of go back to the days of Chris Peterson, they've rattled off some 10-win seasons over there in the Pac-12. I think the general thought from us in the Big Ten is that it's a whole different ball game. Going from the Big 12 to the Big 10 is completely different, and they got to be ready to play.
Yeah, I totally agree. I forgot I have an appointment at 8.
All right, you got to wrap it up then.
Yeah, I apologize about that. I could do this talking all night, but I just got a reminder that I actually have a work appointment I got to do. So.
Well, we appreciate you coming on here to Big Ten Ted Live.
You bet.
Tomorrow night, going to be on the Big 12 Mafia show, so kind of this conference crossover. Tell people where they can find you on Twitter, YouTube show, all that before you go here tonight.
You bet. It's at B12 Mafia on Twitter, and it's at the Holy Rivals on Twitter, and then on YouTube, it's Big 12 Mafia and the Holy Rivals. 2 channels, and I stream on both. And I'm excited for BYU to be finally in a big conference again. It's been a long time, and so I really appreciate you bringing me on today, Ten. Tomorrow's going to be fantastic.
Once again, thanks to Bomb3r for joining us here tonight. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks again.
Okay, yeah, we'll see you later. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks to Bomb3r for joining us here tonight. Great discussion when it comes to the Big Ten and when it comes to the Big 12. Going to wrap things up here. Kind of get into some comments here to wrap things up. We've got Nathan Campbell coming in. I think Notre Dame ends up in the Big 12. That's going out on a limb. Let's just say that because of BYU, Utah, TCU, and Baylor. Look at the rivalries that they would have out there. As well. Joey chiming in. Good luck playing Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, Wisconsin, week after week. You better, kind of echoing the sentiment that I kind of had before. You better have dudes up front on that side of the ball. But I also think on the other side, Big Ten teams, we got to be ready. Got to be ready for that offensive football kind of going forward. It's going to be a balance. Both Big Ten teams and the West Coast teams, guys coming in as well. Got to find that balance going forward as well. Want to thank everybody for joining the show here tonight. Big Ten Ted Live. Once again, going to have a discussion about Washington football coming up on the channel this week. Got my live prediction show coming up on August 23rd or 24th. Once again, thanks everybody for checking out Big Ten Ted Live tonight. I'm Big Ten Ted, and we will see you in the next one.